Good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for joining us on Civic Space TV, a place where you can get all the information that you need to make the right democratic decision come 2026 as we are heading into elections as a country. This is the Citizen Chat Show. I am Priscilla, Regina, Nalwoga, and I will be your host this afternoon. Our topic for the day is simply looking at Uganda and its experiencing of a democratic backslide. And the question is, are we moving backwards or are we moving forward? Eyes on the political context ahead of the 2026 general election. And I'm delighted to be having a panel that is not new to your eyes and your audience, and yet they have something to say on the subject matter through experience and, of course, as democratic participants, but also leaders in the civic space. To my immediate left, I'm joined by the head of history department at Kyambogo University, and that is Dr. Robert Ojambo. Doctor, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon and thank you.
How are you?
I'm fine. Glad to hear you today here.
It's a pleasure to have you. Dr. Sarah Bireete also joined us as the Executive Director, Center for Constitutional Governance.
Thank you, and good afternoon, viewers. Glad to be with you here today.
It's a pleasure to have you. And then we also do have from the East African Legislative Assembly, Honourable George Odongo. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Priscilla.
It's also good to have you here.
Thank you very much.
You'll help us draw the lines and linkages within the East African community on the subject matter.
Definitely.
All right. We also do have Mr. Joseph Ochieno, who is a political commentator and always here gladly to offer his expertise on the subject matters. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Always a pleasure to be with you, and always a pleasure to be here representing UPC, the youth, and of course, Center for Constitutional Governance.
Why the youth? Why the youth?
They're the future.
Right. Okay. We also do have Major Awich, Pollar, NRM Director for External Relations. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm fine, and you?
The roadmap is moving according?
Yes, we are very proactive and we are set to the dot. Even as I left the top management concluding something in the meeting.
Okay. Well, this week started off on a sad note on the 21st of April 2025, which was Easter Monday. The world woke up to saddening news of the death of Pope Francis, who is or was the leader of the Catholic Church. And so as we get into the DJ for his final send-off, we get to ask ourselves the question, what has been the impact of such a leader of faith to the rest of the elements that do define society? I'm going to allow each one of my guests to be able to say something in that regard and eulogize the Pope, and then we can get into the matter of the day. I'll start with you, Dr. Rob.
Thank you so much. The Pope was a fantastic guy, and you know, he represents a purpose which is, although it is a religious institution, but sometimes it surpasses religion. But the person who was in there was also a unique person. You know, popes have had a lot of history in Europe, beginning with the ones maybe people may know about, Pope Pius, the one who brought the controversy between the Anglican Church and the Catholic Church, and so many others. But this Pope has been, as already called, the poor people's Pope, a person who has wanted to live a simple life. I remember when he came here, I expected him to travel in a huge limousine. He was in a small car. And going to places, he didn't want a lot of flair.
He didn't have a convoy.
There was no convoy. Cars. In fact, the convoy were the people. I really think that he has represented the church well. Back home in Argentina, he has been having problems with the current government there. In fact, he made history that from the time when he became Pope, he never stepped back in Argentina. That was a very big message to the country because he was sympathizing with the socialist group that was there, and the government then was not happy. But I was happy to hear yesterday that the president has put things to the end and they are going to attend the funeral without any other problem. To us in Uganda, we have been blessed that most popes love us. So in their tenure, they try to come here, at least in the recent times. And this pope came to Namgongo, where I stay. I was shocked. I thought that the number that was in Namgongo was going to be big. When the Pope went to Indonesia, he met 6 million people who attended his mass live, not on TV. I think the biggest number in Africa has been Congo, in Kinshasa. That's where the Pope had 1 million people. So he's loved by Muslims, by Protestants, by other people. And I think they really show the good side of a leader. Very humble. Sometimes I'm made to think that popes are supposed to be humble people and simple. They don't talk with authority like these other leaders that we have. Remember, he's both religious and political leader, but they try to hide the politics and push for humanity. May his soul rest in eternal peace, and we hope that the one who will replace him will be a person of his stature. That does not mean that the Pope did not have the other side, but the other side is too small. You cannot compare it to the good side.
Dr. Sarah, we have seen the Pope as one who is or is invited to mediate, especially in political differences. We have seen that experience when his last visit to Congo did bring together political people that were divided at the time of his coming. But in that moment and through his speech, he advocated for unity above all things, for the development and growth of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And so has it been the message throughout the rest of the tours that he has had. What lessons do we derive from him, especially in the perspective of politics and democracy?
Well, Pope Francis was, and will go down in history as the people's Pope. He united society all over the world. He led his tenure with passion, humility, and the principle of inclusivity. Even where people say he made some controversial statements, I've been seeing his clip on when he was asked about the controversial question of gay men, and he said, "Who am I to condemn a gay person? The Bible says, do not judge." So he led with a clear difference, distinction, calling out, countries at war and wars. The last statement and meeting being about Gaza with the Vice President of the US. When he came to South Sudan, it's unfortunate that the people he had come to unite are still up in arms and are draining the development of that country. But the Pope stood out and lived by the words he preached, the values of associating with the ordinary people. He chose not to live in the Pope's palace and stayed in the guest house in Vatican, commonly associating with people, having meals with people in the common restaurants. It was a rare breed of leadership that did not only serve the Catholic religion, but served humanity. May he rest in peace.
All right. Honourable Odongo, I know that you were probably there in 2015 and had the experience of him and how he was received and the message he shared with Ugandans when he came at that time. How do you resonate with the Pope?
The Pope is, Pope Francis, a very unique Pope. He broke ranks with the traditions of the papacy, if you want to call it so. I'm a Catholic. And this Pope was described as the world's parish priest. Because he resonated, he found traction with the ordinary people. And that's why he was extremely loved by the ordinary people, because he related to them and he spoke their language, and he was their spokesperson globally. So wherever he went, he identified with those that were downtrodden, whether it was in South Sudan, whether it's in, I talked about refugee crisis, whether it's in Congo. And he called out, with all the courage, he called out Israel for what was going on in Gaza, which is something that is out of step with it was considered very political, but he made a very brave statement. And he called it murder, what was going on in Gaza, which was a very, very, very powerful statement coming from the Pope. So the Pope was, he amplified the voices of those who didn't find space in the public spaces to air out their concerns. He spoke for them, and he spoke with passion. There's a difference between Pope Francis and Pope Benedict. The previous Pope Benedict, who was also really one of my very, very, I liked the writings of Pope Benedict, because he was a professor,
Was a scholar.
and he was a scholar, and was very, very deeply theological in the way he shaped worldviews, and he put it in text if you went back to look at it. So these were two different, distinct personalities. The other one came from a very theological background, and he put it in text. He was a writer, he was a teacher, while this one translated that text into action and really went further to actually, he came to Africa, for example, about 5 times, I think.
Who?
Pope
Paul.
no,
Francis.
Pope Francis.
Pope Francis. He came to Africa more than, it's recorded that he came to Africa more than 5 times in different places, you know, which is very, very special, rare for a Pope. So the world misses him, the poor people miss him, and may his soul rest in peace.
All right, Joseph, this leaves a very big gap for the transition of the Vatican into a new Pope that they are yet to cast vote on. And it's something that we can also reflect on as we are hoping for transition as, a Republic of Uganda. What are some of the linkages between that transition and the transition that we're looking forward to come the next election for us?
Oh, I don't know. If only I wish Ugandans and Africans would resonate to these personalities. In fact, the way my 3 colleagues already have presented, particularly if you take it from the context of George's comparative analysis between Pope Benedict and Pope Francis, it would be some kind of mini eye-opener. And for me, actually, I must say that as George was saying that, I was taking a spiritual journey within my own self, being a Catholic myself, but being somebody who would say an average scholar. Part of the argument is this, conversation is this, that the first Pope to visit Uganda, privilege that my UPC government received them in 1969, Pope Paul the Sixth in 1969. It was a big thing. Number 2, the people who were privileged and lucky to have met him and then are these spiritual powerhouse, the guys who are revered, almost you touch or don't you touch, linking what George is talking about, and then you bring forward the idea that this is the global parish priest. Being the Catholic that I am, and looking back to what the conservative Catholic Church was only 20 years ago, you would argue possibly 20 years ago, that actually even today, the average parish priests with whom you possibly struggle to go and have a cup of tea with and conveniently, comfortably invite them to your homes. This panel is lucky, we can host bishops. And you guys know what I'm talking about. So when it comes to the tradition of faith, and when it comes to where the Catholic Church as an institution is coming from, this guy is possibly the best teacher. Now, whether or not people are able to put this combination together and then translate this Pope, the global parish priest who walks the journey of Jesus Christ, is interesting. At the election of the Pope, one of the analyses that were coming globally, and I was then in and out of Uganda, and if you look at the television screens in Europe, television screens in North America, television screens in Africa, and then in their own native end, they think, is this guy the populist who's trying to prove a point? No, turns out the guy actually basically lived what he believed, and then fast forward today, someone like George pulled the guy ahead and said, look up, this guy, when it was then, is the same guy talking today. And people then came in to begin to marry into his realities. Hence, the very important thing globally that people, now that Pope Francis has passed on, people now maybe are going to begin to celebrate and appreciate him and his messages and his styles more than they were doing 10 years ago, because as recent as possible 5 years ago, people were taking it sort of for granted. So the message thing, like if you take Sudan, the message thing like on the Middle East, Arab-Israel conflict, for which the most powerful religious leader globally is a pope, usually. And they still, for I've always argued, is it about the size of the Catholic Church, whatever? But that's the most, generally, the most revered, and people normally take them seriously.
Yeah.
But over a period of time, it was almost like, what does Queen Elizabeth think? What will come from the king? Meaning the untouchable words, and then you pick them in nuances. This guy comes out and call him a guy for this very specific reason. Possibly you'll actually laugh about it, and expresses it in a manner in which world leaders ought to take. And I bring you back to the question you asked about leadership. World leaders should take seriously. We, the Christian folks, should take seriously. And the spiritual folks across faith, including those from the other non-Christian faiths, should take seriously. How that then is translated into the reality when you look at a situation like in Sudan, where he comes and kisses these guys, and then you ask, were these people listening? Were these people generally taking vows? Not at all. Here in Uganda, I think people can only smile and laugh and wish and pray that maybe at some stage there is ever political leaders who are able to pick a leaf from Pope Francis. In any case, maybe even some of our religious leaders across this continent, let me take over from Uganda, may have some lessons to learn from Pope Francis.
Major Awich, what are some of those leaves we can pick from the Pope Francis in his passing, having impacted the world and communities with the nature of impact that these panelists have spoken of today? And what are some of those admirable qualities that our own leaders could actually adopt and emulate to be better leaders to our country?
Well, so much to pick, including humility. Maybe honesty, and being firm and strong on a view that you think is correct. Some of us fear to say what is correct, and you be around and about. But I just wanted to say also that I am a Catholic, like some of my friends have said. I'm baptized, and they have slapped my cheek.
It's a pan of
What did I say? I said my colleagues, the panelists.
Everybody, I think, is a Catholic, except the ladies.
No, I said some.
Dr. Ojambo is very concerned.
I said some of my, I used the word, maybe my word some was silent, but I said some. So I'm saying I'm a Catholic, baptized, and my cheek is slapped. In my part of the community, confirmation is done, baptism is done by the priest, and then confirmation is done by the bishop. And that exercise done by the bishop, he said your cheek is being slapped. Bapulema. Bapulema, that is slapping me in the cheek by the bishop. So I'm really passionate about the Catholic. So the discussion or what we're pondering about the Pope is therefore well placed, because the papal position heading Vatican means a lot globally and even nationally. For example, people don't know that the Pope shapes or has shaped a lot of international conventions. For example, a child is defined as anybody below 18. And some people take it for a joke, that a child is anybody below 18. Not from 0 to 18 or from anywhere. Why? Because the negotiation of international instruments, you find that the first draft by Poland was saying a child is somebody 0 to 18. Argentina or proposed this draft because states negotiate conventions. But then the Vatican comes up and said, if you limit, if you put the minimum, then you are actually legalizing abortion. Meaning that your definition is anybody 8 months is not a child. And therefore, if you murder 8 months, then you haven't committed a crime. So the Vatican in that negotiation with the papal guidance comes up and said, colleagues, for the definition of a child, just put the topmost, put the cap, leave the bottom open. So you can see the degree to which the papal presence or position shapes even international law, and even national law, because all national legislations now pick from the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And that's why some of us were really concerned about his position of the same sex. At first, we thought it was maybe against it. Then later, he appeared to be liberal. I was yet to see later on the growth, especially with the US current position, which seems to be clear. Because as we know, the global system is that when America coughs, we feel it. Recently, we have had a judgment in UK Supreme Court
Yes.
defining a woman as by birth, not anyhow. So I'm now yet to see the new papal position, whether it will come out clear or it will still be around and about, considering the wave, therefore, from America and to the rest of the world. Okay. So I'm yet to see whether my Vatican position will be clear. So the things to learn from the Pope, as I said, is limitless. I mean, the long list, humility, being honest, being frank, being firm on what you think is correct, like the Palestinian question, and all that. So I believe, or I think that our leaders will learn a lot.
All right, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for sharing your sentiments with the Pope. Of course, his funeral rites will be finalized on Saturday, and that will be cast across different social media platforms. Here on the Citizen Chat Show, we continue on with the subject matter of the day. Is Uganda experiencing a backwardness or slide in the democratic process that we are heading into general elections 2026? Now, of course, as we are approaching the general elections, there are concerns about the state of its democracy, and this concern is actually intensifying. It used to be among senior citizens, it used to be among its political leaders, but now there's also a growing pressure that is coming through from our young generation. Now, with President Museveni's continued grip on power, and this is since 1986, and the political landscape marked by repression, electoral irregularities, as well as restricted civil liberties, there's definitely many observers questioning whether our country, Uganda, is experiencing a democratic backslide. Now, this inquiry this afternoon is hoping to explore Uganda's current political trajectory, the role of opposition forces, as well as the state of democratic institutions, and what these dynamics could mean for the future of the governance of the Republic of Uganda. Our first question to my panelists this afternoon is plain and simple. What are we looking at as the indicators of a backward democracy? I'll start with you, Dr. Robert.
Yeah, thank you so much. Now, before we delve into that question, I just want to give you the overview in East Africa. Because we can gauge that looking at our colleagues. We have been using those other countries somehow to say whether we are moving or not moving. Around us, the picture looks very ugly around us. When you look at South Sudan, there is almost nothing there. They have postponed elections, I don't know, four times.
Yeah.
Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, there were elections last year. There were so many people who did not vote, especially in the eastern part of Congo, in northern Kivu, because of the problems that were there. So very many people did not decide on the president who is there. When you go to, we have always been singing Tanzania, the Republic of Tanzania. It is becoming dark there as well because of the monopoly of CCM. As we speak now, the place is in turmoil. The leading opposition party has been outlawed somehow. They are not supposed to participate in election. Their leader, Tundu Lissu, is in jail on charges which are tricky. In my view, trumped up charges, because I did not see anything that he did that would lead him to being charged of treason, because just somebody saying that participation or not participating in election. So you see, it is ugly. Rwanda had elections. I sometimes tell my students they are selections, because elections, there must be people that you are electing from, and those people must have equal powers. I remember sometime Rwanda was, the president there was competing with a prisoner. Somebody was in prison. And last year it looked like a choreography. So the only place you see which is doing something towards democracy, and I will surprise the listeners and the viewers, is Kenya. They have problems.
Not Uganda.
They have problems, but they look like they know how to handle their problems democratically by sitting together and agreeing and making consortium and agreeing on this and disagreeing on the other. And they look like they may have issues, but they are handling their issues in what Baganda called Chisaja Chikuru. The opposition leader is now working with the government to solve a few problems after the Gen Z movement and so many other things. Now that ushers us into Uganda. In Uganda, we have been behaving like some religious people. We have a rosary, and my colleagues here talked about the Catholic Church, so I will use the rosary. They will not get angry. They have a rosary. When I was growing up, for those who are real practicing Catholics, you are not even supposed to enter with the rosary into the toilet. You leave it out because it's a holy thing. And if you do that, you have to take it back to the church for blessing on Sunday to regain the other power. These days, people put on rosary even when they are going to steal. He's going to rob, but when they capture him, you see the man has a rosary. And some of you may think I am joking. Recently, a man entered when they were praying for the Kabaka in Rubaga. A man came and he wanted in fact, he was a thief. He had a rosary. He was dressing like a priest. I don't know how they smoked him. And he was trying to remove the rosary. They said, put back the rosary. Put back the rosary so that we do our things. So what I'm trying to say is that in Uganda, you have people who they pretend to be Democrats. But what they do is not democratic at all. And that has been a huge problem. So we are going to measure ourselves because now we cannot compare ourselves with these dwarfs around us. They are already dwarfs. We cannot compare ourselves with the dwarfs. So maybe we probably will compare ourselves with the Western world. If that is the case, we are moving like drunkards. We are moving like drunkards, a man who has taken a lot of alcohol, 3 steps ahead, 2 steps back. And they start staggering. If you passed him in Ntinda in the morning, by the time you come at around 3, still in Ichigowa, just struggling because 3 steps ahead, 2 steps backward. Uganda, after the constitutional arrangement of the 1995, we looked like we were going to move. But over time, especially with the introduction of multi-parties in 2005 and the election which followed in 2006, it looks like we are going back and forward. It looked like parties were starting to gain momentum and therefore becoming the engine of politics in this country. As we talk now, we are soon going back to pressure groups because the parties are not taking us anywhere. We may go back to pressure groups like Pilau and others, just the way it is in Kenya. In Kenya now, they have abandoned. The party is just there for registration, but the real mover of things is a pressure group. They normally form pressure groups and coalitions. Okay. So I think we may also need to take the same. But above all, the biggest hindrance to democracy in Uganda has been the force of the military. The leaders are military people who pretend that they are politicians. And for that matter, the one who has the strongest military wins an election. Right. Be it an MP, be it a president, be it a councillor, you must have some form of military, either pseudo or real military. So that is the biggest problem that we have that may not allow us to move. So you hear these parties saying, I hear, today, by the way, the NRMs are picking forms. But you are going to see, instead of going for election, they will be fighting amongst themselves to get the
Let's actually turn the page to Major there for the NRM. Give us a very brief overview of Uganda's democratic journey, but most especially the last years that NRM has been in power. have we had a backslide of our democracy? Because Doctor here says that we may look democratic, but nothing that we are doing actually is translated as democratic.
Well, I personally, or even NRM, live around my personal views, I don't think there's any backslide. There's no backslide in democracy in Uganda. We have developed and continue to develop. And I think there out there are measures or assessors of democracy or governance. Sarah could know one. I don't know who is that independent assessor or observer, but I remember one of the, is it Afrobarometer? That's one of the latest survey which put us very far up there. What, however, seems to overshadow us here is the normal contradictions that we have in a society, that we have in a family, that you will have in any society that you have. And because of our individual or group political ambition or interest that we have, we therefore present it to look like there's a backslide. Now, apart from the assessment that is made, there are things that prove to us that Uganda has not backslided, instead has progressed. We have maintained regular, free and fair election. The diction used in the constitution is fair, because we will never have a perfect. And those fair indicators are somehow set somewhere. Therefore, for a country like Uganda, with its challenges, including during COVID, there are many schools of thought which came to President Museveni and said, you could use some legislative procedures to actually bypass election. Museveni said, no, we can't bypass election. Instead, we should devise means in the unique and particular circumstance of COVID so that people vote. Because NRM is a strong adherent of Article 1. Power belongs to the people, and therefore it must be exercised. So, therefore, if there was any temptation for backsliding, the COVID test would have proved us. 2, you also have rule of law. We are possibly one of the countries with the best legislations covering all aspects. And we are one of the countries which has a judicial system covering all corners of the country. Anarchical state and a state which lacks rule of law do not have courts all over the country, because you have where there are jungle laws. If even in our brother Kenya here, there was a time when some part of the region, because of some girl with hooligans, there was no education, to the extent that a child petitioned President Ruto over lack of education in the area, and the child was a celeb. Whether you go to Kotido, whether you go to Koboko, or you go to any remotest part of the country, there are courts of law, either magistrates' courts or high court at districts or regional. Laws are working. The other indicator of a democratic country that makes you know that Uganda is not backsliding is in its production, because laws are not set in ideals that it is a matter in the brain. The laws that we have keep to argument people engage in production. And slowly, and indicators are showing that we have production in the country going. Possibly we are among the few countries. Of course, this is not to say that we don't have trade among us, but we are among the few countries that even without aid would survive on food from the garden. Some countries import rice. Rice are landing at the airport every day. Or bread. Senegal or any country you may cite, bread have to land from France. But we have production and argument, and every day the data indicating aspects, whether in milk, whether in whatever production is going on. I can go on and on, but finally, the one thing I want to cite is the argumentation in laws also is a sign of a democratic governance. The argumentation I mean here is that when you pass a piece of law, you think it's thorough. But when you put such a piece of law in test on the ground, you see cracks, and that calls for amendment. And that is why you have a continuous and rich jurisprudence. And that's the sign of democracy. Even at the level of parties, we have seen that even at parliamentary level, to show that we still have a democracy, which is not a backslide, we even once in a while, despite the fact that in our legislative system, we have adversarial argument, where it is proposition, opposition, proposition, opposition. But even the development of our democratic governance is to the extent that once in a while we have point of convergence, and that is a big development in democracy. For example, the gay law that we are talking about. Because even if you bring 100 million like recently in the floor of parliament, people will oppose. But you see that in such a legislation, it was all parties united on that. And that is a sign of a development in democracy, that a party can unite. How about the attempt to have the leader of opposition elected? I went with the Secretary General and the Director Legal. Two directors for the Secretary General. We appeared before a committee of parliament and said, we have had views, including sentiment coming from our own party, that the leader of opposition should be elected. Our view in plot 10, as the people mandated with running the agreed party position, is that let it be that democratic. Let the majority party in opposition have their leader. So these are situations that you don't see in developing democracy. Therefore, it's not true that Uganda has had a backslide. Uganda has developed, and I'm sure many people come here for benchmarking and study.
let's benchmark with UPC here that has been there to actually observe that road for the NRM, but also before NRA when they come into power. What has been the political landscape for us as a country that has either kept us landlocked in one position or stance of politics and democracy? Of course, in reference to what he has he has said that as far as the executive is concerned, we're moving forward. As far as the legislative is concerned, we are moving forward, even with the many major events that we see that could be contrary to what he has said. He has talked about the judiciary also being forward, and we can make recent reference to the Supreme Court ruling on the General Court Martial. But anyway, all these you can really wrap them up in your observancy as one that has been on the other side participating in democracy of this country. Are we really, really using these as the indicators that we are moving forward, or we're stagnant, or we're actually moving backwards?
Comrade Awich is a fantastic spokesperson for NRM.
And speaks the truth.
And speaks for them as well as he possibly can. No, from my personal perspective and from a UPC perspective, and indeed from a global perspective, I will still continue to reflect on the passing on of the Pope and some of the conversations that take place in social media, and some of the things that include people who actually used to support very madly NRM, particularly in the 90s, who thought they were a new hope for this republic. I so think now bringing Ojambo, who says that in Uganda, as the Pope rests, there are 4 African countries with leaders who've outlived at least 3 popes, and that includes Uganda. And then sometimes you begin to wonder, if you look at what happens in those countries, one of course Uganda, the other one is Cameroon plus the other 2, but I'll stick to those 2 because I'm quite familiar with that. And then you see what happens in those countries, then you talk democracy, and then basically these 4 countries are laughing stock, regardless of the detail. Priscilla, I think I'll say to this program that I ever participated in an attempt, actually, Sarah, to broker peace in Cameroon.
You know, when you use attempt, we think of attempted coup.
It was goodwill, and I'm genuinely very disappointed that sort of we didn't make it to the next step. And it was only later that I came to realize that, well, when there is no goodwill, there's nothing you can do. And that is no exception to the Republic of Uganda. But of course, as I said, from the UPC perspective and some of the benchmarks that Comrade sort of seeks to refer, I am saddened because I was in this country of age in the UPC, second UPC administration from 1980 up to elections and up to the time when these guys came into power. And I saw what a government does, including amid its conflict. I saw how Dr. Obote as president and Dr. Semugere conducted themselves. 4.5 years, Parliament was functioning, government was functioning. We had huge negative press from abroad, the West, and huge negative press pushed by NRA and their friends, and huge hostility, particularly within Uganda, without prejudice. That included Kampala because it's the metropole, and of course the war was, including bombs being thrown in the city of Kampala. But I never saw the level of political intolerance, Sarah, that we face today. Dr. Botti continuously with decorum always referred to Paul Semugere as my brother. They would go ahead and taunt themselves in point scoring and making points in Parliament, wherever else. Dr. Botti will tell you on some of the things on record the efforts he makes to invite Semugere to come. You come and we talk. Let's come and discuss these things, including the headlines that appeared the other day, or yesterday. Let's discuss, informally and formally as colleagues, political tolerance, democracy, building it, parliamentarians. I've argued that in Obote too, never was it the case that you could refer to a member of parliament being met at a roadblock to be beaten up or tortured and things like that, and yet DP was officially associated with the rebellion. But quickly, Comrade Awich talks about question of rule of law, and for the purposes of this, I'll just give a general definition. The rule of law is a political and legal ideal that all people and institutions within a political body, nation state, are subject to the same laws, including lawmakers, government officials, and judges. It is sometimes stated simply as no one is above the law. If you just pick merely that yardstick and without the details of semantics of where is NRM, where is UPC, where is NP, you quite clearly see that it's a state in anarchy, where there is a huge amount of impunity, where the president is able to come with huge authority and say, Parliament is just those groups of people, and who's the judiciary? And Army commander says, you guys, the instructions for you to do A, B, C, D. And if it is something that we are discussing today and assessing and we're leading towards an election, and it's a regime that has been in power for 40 years, I think we ought to be doing better. And if I want to seek to review my own position and say that in the spirit of Pope Francis, I should not be belligerent and confrontational on this and to try and be modest, I ask that I only wish that we had had a progress. But if you see what happened in Kawempe the other day, absolutely nothing. If it is the case in which we have the regular elections that Comrade talked about, and these elections took place 20 years when political parties were banned, literally in prison, and in the last 20 years, we have power pluralism. But when you know that in almost every existing political party which is trying to come back into the mainstream, either their leaders are beaten up or some of them are like the FDC guy being nominated barefoot. And then you know that the state is engaging, directly involving itself in political parties. And you find a political party like mine, where you have a matter of a judicial review. I'll keep on saying, the matter of a judicial review, for a political leadership, something that should take 6 months, and it's taking 4 years. And the state and other interests out of impunity are deliberately directly involved. Where's the democracy? I have argued I could go to the bush 20 times. And like one time I was joking to Sarah that maybe one of these days, the only option for the judicial option available for me is to withdraw my case from the High Court and take it to court martial.
Okay, all right. Honourable Odongo, the word democracy is one that comes from the Greek words demos, and that means people, and the other part, kratos, meaning power. Therefore, we can thoroughly say that the power of the people is the true definition of democracy. From your observancy, the many elections that we have had in our country, and also the observancy of the elections that we have had within the East African community, would you rightly sit in your seat this afternoon and comfortably say that the power is still belonging to the people without fear?
I will say power belongs to the people, but with a caveat. First, we have what I could consider the soft infrastructure. That is like legislation is in place. We have a constitution in place, which is the supreme law. And Article 1 says power belongs to the people, and the people will exercise that power regularly, and that has been the case. We have also created institutions, because with legislation comes institutions. I think we have sufficient institutions in place. We have sufficient legislation in place. So the soft infrastructure is in place. The most critical element in a democracy is actually citizen agency. And that is activated in every election. So in this election, there is going to be citizens who will participate in this election. The problem that we are facing, and which is, I think, a problem that cuts across East Africa and actually Africa, overall, is how democracy works. And I think that was very well captured in the Afrobarometer report, which the Honourable which has just shared with us, which shows that Ugandans are very enthusiastic about their democracy. They are really interested, and that's very, very critical in advancing our democracy as a country. But also how that then works. How do you activate citizen agency? I have argued previously that, as long as we do not have horizontal and vertical constraints to power, you are going to still have deficiencies in our democracy, and that's still work in progress. Now, vertical and horizontal. Vertical in the sense that citizens must have sufficient power to regulate the conduct of those who occupy positions. Because they are the primary, everybody holds these positions in trust. So those who are holding these positions in trust must then know that they have people to whom they are accountable. So that accountability mechanism is still the one that we find problems with, that are the people sufficiently empowered to exercise that power, to hold those in offices accountable. That's one. So there is a huge deficit in terms of the exercise of power by the ordinary citizens, to the extent that they are able to leverage on their numbers to be able to hold those in those positions accountable. That's one. Then the horizontal constraints to power are institutions that have a kind of like linear relationship. So if you have parliament, then you have the executive, and then you have the judiciary. These three organs must be able to exercise sufficient power, to hold each other accountable. Because you see, under the doctrine of separation of powers, it does not say you have got to be functionally distinct. Actually, you're supposed to be functionally supportive of each institution. Parliament must be able to make the laws. The judiciary must be able to interpret those laws. The executive has got to implement, So each one of them is important to the other, and they have got to function.
Complementary but
and
independent.
Yes, they have to complement each other. Now, that's what I call the horizontal constraints to power, because if you do not have those horizontal checks and balances, then you are going to create a monster in one of the institutions, whether it is parliament or the executive and the other. Now, there are challenges in that respect, and I think that is where we have got to focus our attention as a country, that how do we make the three organs functionally and mutually supportive of each other? And also, those who are in these positions of power, how do they exercise that power and be able to be accountable? So that element of accountability is very critical in our democracy, and we can argue that.
All right, Dr. Sarah, I brought you out last because from you we want to hear what have been the major events in our democratic processes that could indicate as a country we are moving backwards or we are having a backslide in our democracy.
Okay, maybe building on what George has said is the question of how do you gauge as I come to major events? There are parameters that are used to determine whether a country is making progress democratically or not. And one of the first yardsticks is the rule of law. Then you come to the question of institutions, independent and efficient institutions. You come to the question of the people. How active are the people involved in their governance? Elections, holding leaders accountable, and the checks and balances that are supposed to be taken towards the people, because democracy is about the wishes and aspirations of the people and how the leaders fulfill those wishes and aspirations. Then you look at the question of transparency and accountability. How do you interact with the taxpayers' money? And what does it do, the fiscal discipline or indiscipline? And then free and fair elections, the part of our topic, looking at eyes on the ballot 2026. So when you use these measures, you can, for example, look at the question of rule of law in the country. The legal scholars are leading a campaign on a judiciary in a crisis in Uganda. And they raise evidence almost on a daily basis on social media on how there are faults within the judiciary. We have an incomplete Judicial Service Commission, not fully constituted, where the representatives of the Law Society are missing because of court gymnastics. I hope that can be paved away in a few days. The court gave a decision for reconciliation of or harmonization of processes to have elections conducted in about 2 weeks. So we hope that that vacuum can close. It has happened for long. As a result, we have abuse in appointment of judiciary in the name of acting judges. Judges that the regime appoints and takes away the power of independence so that they can keep tinkering with their decisions. The Constitutional Court ruled in the Kabumba, Dr. Bisinje Kabumba case and others, that it's unconstitutional to appoint judges in an independent or acting capacity. There is no appeal to that decision, but the regime, in its usual exercise of excessive impunity, has appointed another 18 judges in acting capacity in violation of the decision of Constitutional Court. So that's one example that is affecting one arm of government in backsliding. That decision alone and the push by the regime to exercise judicial power over civilians squashes the doctrine of separation of powers. Because what is the premise of the doctrine of separation of powers? Executive initiates laws, parliament passes laws, judiciary implements laws. But executive, because of the need for political repression, is pushing to make laws that gives them judicial power because the military is an arm of the executive over civilians. Article 126 of the Constitution is very clear under Chapter 8. Judicial power is derived from the people and must be exercised in accordance with the wishes and aspirations of the people. So you want one arm, you have one arm which is having an overreach on another arm for political repressive reasons. No other reason whatsoever. So when you look at the civil and political liberties, how free is a Ugandan citizen in participation of day-to-day governance? If you passed a survey, most Ugandans fear now speaking up about political issues because of abductions, kidnaps. Young people continue to go missing every other day. Even today, the leader of NUP in Masaka, I think, was just dumped at Masaka Central Police Station after going missing for 2 months. And then, of course, he's in bad shape, body with the injuries and the rest, the usual gloomy pictures that we are treated to, the harassment of Ugandans, especially young people, whose crime is not supporting the regime. Since 2020, when we degenerated into abductions and kidnaps, you can imagine a country and a regime that is engaged in internal disappearances of its own citizens because those citizens don't support it. What other evidence of degeneration do you need? Look at the clampdown on media and the civil society. One can claim that these entities exist in physically, institutions exist of media, of NGOs, but what is the health of these institutions? We have had, people are moving away from investigative journalism because when you do a critical investigative journalist piece, you will have your day or two in cells. The recent one being Solomon Seranja, when he did that investigative documentary on health sector in partnership with the BBC. I think he had spent a weekend in custody. From then on, we have had a gradual decline of investigative journalism in this country because of the harassment that those journalists go through. Recent example of Kawempe, all journalists were rounded up, abducted, drones, beaten. They've spent about 3 weeks in hospital for covering an electoral exercise, and the first for covering a citizen's regular exercise. If you come to NGOs, the government has done a regulatory impact assessment on the laws that had already closed like half the space of NGOs. And you know what they are proposing? As I conclude, yes, government is proposing to establish a basket fund of NGOs that whoever wants to contribute to work of NGOs must pass money through government. They are also proposing to create a council of NGOs. Then they put stooges in those councils to crowbar down the sector, like in Tanzania. And they're also proposing that if you don't want to put your money in the government basket fund, an NGO like CCG, then you first get cabinet approval to sign up a grant. I mean, really, who is fooling who? We are not just moving in a zigzag process like drunkards. We are just on our way back in reverse gear at high speed, democratically.
All right, thank you so much, lady and gentlemen. Of course, we have had a check and balance on the independence of the Constitution for the Republic of Uganda. And later on in our next hour, we're going to be having a breakdown and assessment of our Constitution of 1995. What was it trying to remedy back then? And did the remedies work? But then at the same time, we have seen a breakdown in the rule of law. It begs the question, do we need an overhaul or a readjustment of some of the elements in our Constitution? We've also looked at the separation of powers, and of course with evidence and examples. While the NRA says, or NRM says that on their side, everything is moving according to plan. Of course, there's assessments that are not really coming to terms with the fact that that's NRM position, given the events again that have happened. We've also looked at accountability and transparency, and that continues to decline or head backwards than forward. So again, it begs the question, is our country, Uganda, experiencing a democratic backslide? That's the question that we hope in the next hour we'll find answers to right after this break.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create and publish digital media, or to access and use computers, other electronic devices, and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Thank you so much for still being with us. It is the Citizens Chat show on the Civic Space TV. And of course, we continue to find the answers to our country, Uganda's democracy. Is Uganda experiencing a democratic backslide? This is in reference to the reflections that we must make as we journey towards yet another electoral cycle come 2026. Now, of course, we do have the Uganda Constitution that we stand on as of today, the 1995 Constitution, having been hailed as a milestone towards democratization, establishing a framework of multi-party politics, separation of powers, and the protection of civil liberties, something that my panelists have already touched base on. However, of course, we do have many elements such as the 2005, a significant amendment reintroduction of multi-party politics that was also removed. Then we also do have the presidential terms, the Toji situation. So there's been quite a number of events that have actually affected and impacted on the Constitution that is meant to be the backbone of our very own democracy and governance, to which I'll start with Dr. Sarah Bireete. In regards to the 1995 Constitution, it came into existence because we were trying to remedy the past for us as a country so as to have a better carpet for the future that we wanted to see. When we are here today in 2025, it's exactly 30 years since the 1995 Constitution. Have those remedies actually been given solution to? And do we see progress in that direction? But also the other question I have for me is that with the so many elements of adjustment that we have seen in the Constitution, what are some of the backwardness that we have adopted through that is taking us back to where we were not wanting to go as a country?
Yeah, thank you, Priscilla. You know, the hope and the promise of the 1995 Constitution has not yet been realized in the 3 decades of its promulgation. At the time of promulgation, there were 3 controversial issues. One was the question of the national language, 2 was the question of land, and 3 was the question of the multi-party politics. These basically were the issues that were regarded as outstanding, that needed maybe to be resolved through amendments. But the achievements, like for example, if you go through the spirit of the preamble, and specifically paragraph 3, where, you know, from the promise of we the people, and an element that is largely missing is in our constitutionalism, is the people element. Paragraph 3 envisaged the situation of a permanent and durable constitution. What does that mean? Does it mean that the constitution should never have been amended? But in progressive constitutionalism, you are meant for progress, not retardation. So what happened through the amendments has been efforts, maximum efforts by the regime, including use of brutality, bribery, and other methods of coercion, is to regress and retard the constitution. First amendment that really degenerated our constitution was the issue, of course, when the referendum came, the issue of a bloated cabinet. When the constitution fixed cabinet size at 23, senior cabinet ministers and 23 ministers of state. They put a clause and with support of parliament. So the framers of the constitution envisaged the size of cabinet at 46. We are now at 82. Using that smuggle that with approval of cabinet. And you want to ask why would the cabinet be the problem that I start with? Because that was the first act of violating the constitution. Cabinet consumes a lot of money with zero value addition. Zero value addition. The president is on record to have said that he knows his cabinet doesn't mean something much, but it's okay. Even called them fisher women and whatever. Meaning that he also knows that they bring nothing on table in terms of the would-be cabinet advice and the core, concentrated team of people leading the country. He knows they don't have it. If you compare with all cabinets in Uganda's post-independent history, I think we have the worst cabinet in terms of caliber and value that they bring on table. But most ministers have been on record saying he's the only one-eyed man amongst the blind, according to their own testimonies. Presidential advisors, who are more than 130, all of them who have spoken to media, say they've never met the president to advise him. So you just have that one-man dictatorship who knows everything, tells people what they should do, and then their job is just implementers. The other amendments that have, of course, been critical is expansion, creation of so many districts. At the time of enactment of the Constitution, we had 56 districts. Many people, out of ignorance, they think that when you have a district near you, then you get services. But if you go back, and I'll use my home district, Bushenyi, if you go back to Bushenyi, before it was divided into 5 districts, with the creation of 4 more, even the people who broke away, they, other than political jobs, they know that there is no substance in creation of districts, other than a creation of patronage and outlets for political jobs. So that also, of course, diluted our fiscal, infrastructure through multiple units of administration, and hence they brought the administrative budget that we are grappling with as a country. Okay. Removal of term limits was the worst mistake that the parliament could have done. It was procured after bribery. That was the first time Ugandans saw bribery aimed at changing legislation. The famous 5 million shillings, then valued at a cost of $3,000, and young people can translate what it cost to lose the orderly and peaceful handover of power that is guaranteed in the spirit of the Constitution under paragraph 3 of the preamble. The last amendment that became crazy with use of force was the removal of age limit, where then President Museveni and his army attacked Parliament, beat up MPs in chambers, yet chambers are secret, and anybody without clearance is not supposed to enter the chambers. So whereas President Museveni used to laugh at the surrounding of Parliament with the troops under Obote, for him he did not just surround. He entered, he invaded the secret place of Parliament, beat up MPs, some were hospitalized for years, just to keep himself in power. So those are some of the amendments that really took away the premise of the Constitution and made it a mere fallacy.
Okay, Dr. Ojambo, this comes in with the question of enforcement. How has the enforcement or lack of our constitutional rights, such as freedom of speech, assembly, and association, impacted the democratic participation of the people of the Republic of Uganda, but even the civic space by and large?
Let me first say this, then I come to that question. I have written, because writing means you have to read first, and argued that the 1995 Constitution has been used as a tool by Museveni and his NRM to promote dictatorship in Uganda. By mere fact that this work was published, I think it has some sense.
And you're still seated here today.
Yes. So I looked at this Constitution very carefully. And like my colleague Kabumba normally says, the Article 1, which they keep singing about here, power belongs to the people. I think the writers of the Constitution hid that sentence is incomplete. In Uganda, power belongs to the people with the guns. If you don't have a gun, you don't have power. And you have seen this. You can be picked anywhere so long as people have guns. Be it soldiers, these days it does not matter whether they are soldiers or policemen, but people with the guns, those ones have power. Number two, I have argued that the Constitution gave a lot of power to the presidency. Over 40 articles in the Constitution are giving power to the presidency. So a presidency is a very strong institution in Uganda. It appoints everybody except religious leaders. In fact, very soon they may amend that the president will also appoint the bishops and the cardinals and those other people. And he has been feeling bad. And sometimes I think he normally participates in the appointment because now it is not a rule, but it's a norm. Every bishop who is appointed in the Church of Uganda is given a vehicle by the president. He's always there waiting to hand the key to this person. And I said, how did this man become a financier of the church? So that created a lot of problems. You can imagine in a country, and normally Matembe sits here, and I normally don't want to have a quarrel with her because they are the people who made this constitution, and she talks well about the constitution. And I wonder, how could these people accept some of the things? That the presidency is so powerful in a country, which you are saying you have separation of power. The president appoints the chief judge. The president appoints the inspector general of police. The president appoints the army commander or the CDF now. The president appoints all the chief administrative officers. He appoints all the ministers. He appoints virtually every big officer that you have. So by the time you are going for an election, you have appointees of the president, more than 1,000. More than 1,000 appointees of the president. The chairman of the Electoral Commission, they argue that this, no, he does the appointment, but they are approved by parliament. And I have also looked at that. How strong is parliament to reject or accept this appointment? I think in all appointments, they have only rejected 3. And I remember Sevagala, because of his unclear qualifications when he was appointed a minister without portfolio, which he was calling a minister of Otpoto. Then the other 2. But in most cases, this appointing thing is just, and the constitution is designed in a way that the chairperson of the appointments is the speaker. Now, in most cases, the government makes sure that the speaker is of NRM. Now, do you expect any speaker in Uganda to reject something which has been proposed by the chairperson of NRM? If it was in Tanzania or other countries where the speaker comes from a neutral ground, it would be a different thing. Then the other issue in the constitution, which was very, very difficult, is the relationship which these people are talking about, elections. Elections, and it relates to electoral commission and so on. I heard here somebody quoting Afrobarometer. I don't agree with Afrobarometer. Afrobarometer normally grades things which are not supposed to be statistically. Like I heard my colleague here, the Honourable MP, saying that Ugandans are very enthusiastic in electing their people. I hope you have been seeing the voter turn-up in Uganda. From you don't even limit it from these recent ones. You move from 1980 to date, and you see the percentage turn-up. The worst was this one in Kawempe, where you expected 130-something thousand, and only barely 40,000 came to vote, barely 40. So I really think that this thing of saying that people are going for elections In fact, the number of people who are not going to participate in election are more than the number of people who go to participate in election. Is that what Afrobarometer calls enthusiasm? Then the last item is what my friend said, that you see, this is not a dictatorship because there are elections. In that same study, I discovered that it is dictators who like election so much. Dictators, and I used examples of a number of dictators in Africa. Bashir of Sudan, the former dictator in Egypt, the dictators that once the president of the United States, Bill Clinton, called the new breed of African leaders. They include Paul Kagame, Afaki of Eritrea, Yoweri Museveni of Uganda, Meles Zenawi of Ethiopia. They like elections. But the only difference between them and Democrats, they only organize elections which they must win.
Okay.
They must win those elections. And they make sure that they put up an infrastructure manned by the military. The election, people ticking, they are just to show TV on TV that people are electing. But the election is determined elsewhere by the army. So my view is the 1995 Constitution in itself was it duped Ugandans, and Ugandans were very happy, but they didn't look at what Baganda call a nyingo, the stem of this
duping,
constitution.
Let me turn to Joseph there. Do you feel as opposition parties right now that the 1995 constitution has elements of duping you in regards to the relationship that opposition has with the state?
In fact, the 1995 constitution said the opposition was not there. It was just an amendment.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I would not call it duping. The 1995 NRA Constitution was an NRA document used and designed and part of a very organized NRA scheme way back from 1986-87, possibly 87, designed to create legitimacy for NRA mainstream entering. The people who were possibly duped into this mess was DP, who were then partners of NRA from 1985-86. By the time of the beginning of the creation of the NRC, as they call them, in 89, it was basically creating a functionality and functioning authorities to make Museveni and his team take political charge of this country, and so therefore mainstream themselves from bandits of the bush who do not have legitimacy, but to guys who have grounds and foundations to govern. Of course, granted, they had a particular constituency in Uganda that they needed to try and persuade that they're different, they're new, and there's an element of democracy. In any case, UPC first challenged this thing, and Robert, you can check, as way back as 1989. In fact, the case that eventually led to the lifting of the ban on political parties was first instituted by UPC in 1989, challenging the legality of the NRC. So basically that. So as UPC, we say, we told you so. We knew these guys are not Democrats. Museveni came on an agenda, it's a monolithic agenda, but he wanted legitimacy and credibility. Then two, on the constitution itself, per se, when these guys set up the CEA, clearly, as I said, I think as Robert said, the CEA was a body that was constituted first time anywhere in the world where a constituent assembly is set when political parties are in prison and set, and they give representation based on individual merit, and people of course went ahead and danced over it for whatever reason, it's part of the propaganda, but where soldiers had officially 10 seats, automatically for them, and political parties had 2. So you can actually see where these guys were set and going. But I think one of the problems that some of the members of the CA genuinely bought into the idea that this guy, Museveni from the bush, was some kind of new messiah. And so genuinely, a section of them genuinely believed Mr. Museveni. But I know there's some of them who genuinely knew what their mission was with Mr. Museveni. Now, some of the people who genuinely believed Museveni and became part of this mission think that to challenge this narrative is basically to undermine their thinking and their thoughts. But why not? The reason why it's important is in part what Dr. Ojambo suggests about this power that they gave Mr. Museveni. Museveni was such a messiah that in 1995, anything he wants, you give. I've even had a friend who was a member of the CE will tell you that, look, we went to the guy and the guy says this, we give. We give because we thought he was a good guy who was going to let go in 5 years' time. So it can tell you what was going on. So no, one of the biggest frauds in this country has been that 1995 constitution. And let me tell you, flanked by lawyers and senior friends here who in academics and HR. Minus how the CA, the constitution came into to be composed. I have argued separately, and I think it's part of the conversation in the future. And I know Sarah, whose part of her job is that, and she's very good at it, when it comes to constitutionalism. I have actually suggested that we do not need a CA, we do not need, and possibly don't necessarily need a new constitution. The view is that, the Museveni as well, they're going to the pushing their agenda, that is basically the other agenda, which is Ugandan agenda. Say, Obote, did the pigeonhole constitution in 1967, and then, went and took out the 1962 constitution. Simply said, you came and ruled, and you got sworn in, I think, under 1967 constitution. Why didn't you just go and seek constitution amendment? You amend the constitution. So we could have gone back and governed under 1962 constitution as amended. Actually, part of my argument today is that, we can actually concede because now we're under 1995 constitution. We do not really need to go through those processes. But quick thing, if you don't mind. Sarah suggested this thing about the army of surrounding parliament. Actually, there was an incident, only one incident in 1967, when there was an attempt, a coup attempt, and that coup attempt involved serving ministers in Obote government. That was the only circumstance. I was in Obote, so there was nothing else about the army. In fact, Obote took government, when NRA guys were throwing bombs, including the streets of Kampala, you'd walk in parliament and out. I did not see soldiers anywhere near parliament, and no soldiers near the police. So that's how bad the whole thing is. And it's not a political point, it's a fact.
All right, Honourable Odongo, this begs the question, what are some of those constitutional reforms that we need to adopt or think about starting now so that we can have a better political environment and participation of citizens in electoral processes 2026 and beyond for our country?
I have a completely different view, actually, because the path of constitutional reforms has been trodden before. The courts of law have made several recommendations. Each time there's an election, there is a petition in court pronounces itself and gives recommendations. So if you ask me about what recommendations we need for constitutional reforms, they are all there, they are documented. You see, you can have a constitution. You can even have so many pieces of legislation. It really does not matter that much. Because what matters is the spirit, constitutionalism, and all of us are culpable. Those in us who support the NRM and who are in the government, and also those in the opposition, we are all culpable in one way or the other. I can tell you from the character of our own political organizations. We have transformed these organizations into special purpose vehicles for purposes of elections. So we activate our structures, and we go into the elections of our structures. We begin to, to position ourselves because we want to win an election. And once we win these elections, and then we begin brinkmanship. In parliament, you must be seen to be outspoken against NRM. That's your weapon for re-election again. It does not really, there is no conviction. And when confronted, you find that most of these people really retreat. So the question is, how do we, as a country, mobilize and marshal that citizen agency and translate it into something that is more actionable? That let's have a leadership that at all levels respects the rule of law, You know, you can just take a casual walk right now. Go to which is the nearest. Go to Ntinda here, and just sit and watch. You see how people break the rules with reckless abandon. You know, so you can see that it is not because we do not have traffic regulations. It's not because we do not have regulations that govern the conduct of, you know, or in the public spaces and so on and so forth. We have them. Is it that the Electoral Commission does not have sufficient laws to protect it? They have, you know. So the malaise that the country is facing is something that we must all be concerned about. It has nothing, in my opinion, to do with let's test these institutions and regulations by actually adhering to their mandates and adhere to the rule of law and see whether we are not going to have a thriving country. I think this country has enough policies. It has enough laws. It has a very progressive constitution in spite of how much powers are being, you know, given to the presidency and so on and so forth. But we have turned them into, some of these institutions have been turned into patrimonial institutions. They mirror the individuals. So we must also be concerned about who are these individuals who are running these institutions, because they have become the institution themselves, you know. So I think I have said it in here and in many fora that, you know, the argument that let's build institutions because then institutions become, you know, the safeguards. Institutions are as good as the people who run them. You know, we have seen it. Many people will tell you that, oh, Musisi was a very good ED of Kampala's
City Council.
KCCA. But she was running the same institution. So what happened? What happened that we are not getting the same service delivery? It's because we have had the changes in the people. So we have got to make sure that the quality of the people we elect is very important. Whether they are members of parliament.
There's the quality of people that we elect, but then there's also the
quality
quality
of
of
the voter.
people, of the voter.
The quality of the
There's
voter.
also the quality of the appointed people
All
in the
that.
institutions.
Yes,
Because
that's
the
what I'm
ones that you're
saying.
talking
That's what I'm
about are
saying.
for
All of us
appointment.
are culpable.
Yeah.
You get it? You see, Major Awich is here and is able to come here and is able to articulate very, very well the policy positions of government, of the NRM and so on and so forth. There are not many of them who can do this.
Okay. So, Major, on that
You see,
point, then we put you on the
there are
hot
not many
spot,
of them
to
who are
help us
capable of coming here
understand
and
why do we
provide
continue
a
to
very
see
compelling case for the party.
Why do we continue to see failure in separation of powers at institutional leadership level, where you do have, for example, the office of the president, and the president seems to have precedence, saying most recently in reaction to the Supreme Court ruling that power belongs to the people, but yet in actual reference, what the people feel he's saying is that power belongs to me, I'm the people, what I decide goes. We are seeing the CDF increasingly also having his stance on political affairs, when the military by and large should not be participatory in any way in the democracy of this country. We're seeing leaders and heads of other security organs coming out to vocalize themselves as strong, and that they will actually cause some damage towards anybody who thinks that they're going to cause any ruckus and fracas come 2026 general elections. And they're speaking as individuals, or are they speaking as individuals or leaders of these institutions? So there's that confusion that we are seeing as the people, and it begs the question, as the party in power, how are you ensuring that these can be separated, that the individual and the office must be separate, and that that individual can be held accountable for misrepresenting the offices or the institutions?
Well, on the issue of separation of first of all, I'd like to thank Honourable Odongo for his observation about my ability to explain things. I do it. I've grown through seeing NRM methods of work. Possibly, I'm among those who still believe that NRM is the NRM, I know. So, and that's why I strongly believe that if there's any discrepancy in the methods of work of people who are now in other positions, that is another thing. But thank you so much, Honourable Odongo, for that, and I will continue to do my best. Now, the question is on the separation of powers, and also how the possibility of distinctions between office bearers in what they say and what they mean, if there's a distinction anyway. But let me just make a few comments on what my friends have raised. Doctor strongly believes that there's no election. And he gives examples of from the tip of Africa, from Mediterranean down here. Doctor, you see, if we should distinguish that in Egypt and Sudan, the elections that were held would end up in the winner winning with 99%. At least in Egypt, even in Sudan, 98%.
82 and 80.
99, the Egypt was the last election, and others.
Yes.
But the distinction here is that the democratic governance that we are talking about in Uganda, we really have genuine election to the extent that we nearly win with 53%. If we were that good riggers, or it is institutionalized as it is, why would it be 53%? And how comes in a broad geographical region like Uganda, that party chooses not to rig there and rig somewhere else? Or rigs in that case in Nyabushozi and not in Wakiso? I'm not saying you should answer because I was hearing you and taking notes.
No, let me qualify that also a little bit.
Not answer.
That how comes that previously this is the same region that was predominantly NRM and now has turned into no? Wasn't it possible that the NRM would have continued to rig so that the region continues to be yellow? The fact that there has been a change and that people have turned and now can have red means that there was an election. Continue.
Thank you so much. How would it, if this institutionalized rigging was there, that you see your vice president lose and you don't rig, and that you see some polling stations you even get Museveni gets 0 and you don't rig there, that you see your ministers like Amelia Chamba there and you don't rig, and they said you are such an institutionalized good rigger. You see that kind of argument, if somebody was not in Uganda, if somebody came from planet Jupiter, they would think Uganda is such a bad country. But fortunately, we're all on planet Earth. Therefore, the question of rigging that is not sustainable because all indicators are there that it is not. Okay. Otherwise, we wouldn't be the situation we are. On whether a law is hard or frozen, a law is never hard and frozen. We said here and again that when you put it to test, you see cracks, even a beautiful law. However, the framers of the 1995 Constitution, in their wisdom, ring-fenced provisions that you can't amend anyhow. And those provisions are the ones that you go to referendum. Meaning that the framers knew that with a dynamic society, this is bound to. And whatever amendment has been done with the demands of the society. Now, and I have several comments, but I will withhold it for now. So that I go back to the separation of powers. True, the separation of powers in this country. The only thing that disturbs us, including scholars, is how independent is this independent? Is it that independent that they should completely work separate from each other? And this is a question which even disturbs scholars in research and in universities, because you are not going to say Parliament is independent when it's getting money from Kasaija. You are not going to say judiciary is independent when it gets money from this. All the appointment provisions that are there are put by law. I have been asking my friends, if this appointment distracts separation of power, how else do you want it? Even if you put it like in the Kenyan case where there's a vetting process on the TV, somehow there must be a genesis. Even if you say it is supposed to be done by public service, that public service again has to be set by government, by the executive. That public service has set this system, and therefore judges or commissioners of election commission will be vetted. There must be a start. It just can't come from the vacuum. And that start is always hinged to the executive. So on the issue of separation of powers, it's some scholars say it is a fallacy. In other words, they're separated by they need each other. And it is on that aspect of needing each other that some of us misinterpret to say, there's no separation. There's no separation. Otherwise, parliament needs the executive needs parliament. Parliament needs the judiciary because the judiciary also interprets the law. Parliament makes the law for the judiciary to interpret. Judiciary needs parliament because it makes them the law. So the idea of independence is well exercised, and therefore, being a flexible, a dynamic society, whoever feels free to make amendment is always free to do that.
Okay.
Now, on the office bearers, the office bearers' statements, whether private or not, also continues to be a point of debate. I remember one time some German TV put me on some interview, and that was when the Kenyan question came up, when General Moses said he would take over Kenya in 1 week. So I told him that in Uganda, there's a cartoonist called Ekanya. Ekanya went to a bar and told people that when I drink, everybody should drink. And people started drinking. Then he said, as when I pay, everybody should pay. Then he said, but you told us to drink. He said, but if you could hear my order to drink, why don't you hear my order to? So in that case, I told them that Moses said he would take Kenya in 1 week. You believed it. He said he was joking. You don't want to believe him. Why? Why don't you believe him like Kanye said? Then these guys were wise. They told me again.
That's one of the many
Yes.
responses.
Then
they
told me again.
Different circumstances.
They told me again that, Mr. Director, are you trying to tell us that the son of the president is a joker? And you know the way you journalists want the other side of the story. That journalistic thing where if a dog bites meat, it is not news, but when meat bites dog, it is news. So I told them no. If Peter says yesterday was running, does it mean Peter is a runner? Because a runner is a professional thing you do every day. So if he said he was joking, it doesn't mean he's a joker. Oh. So therefore, the point here is personal statements and position statements will continue to be a point of debate.
Okay.
And therefore, I think it is better for the issuer to speak for himself. It is better for the issuer to speak for himself.
Parables are translated
The
according
joker
to the
to
belief
joke
of the individual.
Yes.
All right, so let's talk about the civil and political liberties. Sarah, where do we stand today as we're looking ahead to the 2026 general elections?
Yeah, briefly, two things. One will lead me to the question. The issue of the president having so much powers in our constitution. I know that there are 46 articles that speak about the presidential powers. The framers of the constitution never envisaged a situation of a permanent president.
No, yeah.
Any president was supposed to exercise this power for a maximum of 10 years. Now we have a situation of an individual occupying one office for 40 years or 4 decades. So the problem that makes a constitution look a burden is not the constitution itself, but the failure to transit. Let me give an example. If you look at the method of appointment, Uganda, Kenya, What changes with the two constitutions is that Kenya has a transparent and citizen-inclusive method. If Honourable George Odongo is up for a job of electoral commission, you will have adverts, you will have the public then brings in short list, then the public brings petitions, then you have televised interview. But from that, again, it's the president who signs. So the problem with our situation is that, for example, if you have Public Service Commission or Judicial Service Commission, there are elements of rubber stamping and lack of transparency. So that's the major difference. But finally, the person who signs is the same. So our problem is one person occupying a very powerful position permanently, in perpetuity. That's the problem with our
He
constitution.
appoints a father, the son, and the grandson.
Yes. So it's not the constitution pass, it's the failure. It's the permanent presidency. The question Afanda which brings in that will bring me to the issue of civil liberties, the doctrine of separation of powers. The purpose is to divide, the right division of labor. Division of labor in simple words, to prevent the concentration of power under one arm of government and provide for checks and balances. It is as simple as that. When you have this doctrine of separation of powers, core functions, separate institutions, each branch can limit or check the other's conduct, reducing the risk of arbitrary rule or tyranny. The framework helps to ensure accountability, protects individual liberties, and maintains the rule of law, where we are coming to. Afanda which talks about the issue that they draw money from government. Consolidated fund is citizens' money.
Yeah.
So to say that money has gone to parliament, it is not NRM money going to parliament. It is citizens' money divided for specific core functions of government. I'm answering you. You made your submission, take your notes.
I'm just showing the
No,
link.
take your notes. So it's not so that you are distributing checks. This business of NRM handouts that has really bastardized our politics. Public money belongs to taxpayers. It does not belong to the president. It does not belong to NRM. If it goes to any person doing public job, it is not a handout or a favor or an enactment to compromise them. Okay. That is misleading. The state of enjoyment of civil liberties. Let's look at the right of assembly, Article 29 of the Constitution. Freedom of assembly, association, conscience, worship, and movement. I think for me, under that grand article that provides for civil and political liberties in the country, the rights being enjoyed fully is the freedom of worship. There are churches mushrooming everywhere. There are people preaching on the streets, religious leaders meeting whoever they want. They go about their functions. Nobody interrupts them whatsoever. Even the cult movement, that's how it degenerated into Chiwete, massacring people. We have this man who wears white and calls himself God. Recently he was in Arua. Moves and all roads are crossed. We don't even value other people. But if it was Bob Wine, then you have the military, the members, so the comparison between religious and political freedom in this country clearly lays out to the picture of red versus white. It's white for the worshippers, it's red for the political opposition. They cannot do their business. Recently, political mobilization. We are in a year for consultations under the Presidential Elections Act. 12 months to elections. It's open for anybody who wants to contest for president to consult. But in this country, at Section 3 of the Presidential Elections Act, has never been effected. Okay. The presidential candidate who attempted to provoke it, Amama Babas, was intercepted on his way in Jinja going to Mbari. Not allowed. Political parties 1 year into elections, NUP mobilization activities have been halted. They are stuck at the headquarters. They did the Uganda tour on the headquarters because police has stopped them from moving. But if NRM, even if they want to do night dancing, there's a time they were wearing
they do
these
that all the
dry
time.
banana leaves. So that selective application of the law, curtailing of work of political parties, curtailing work of citizens' freedom of assembly, protest, enjoyment,
Yes.
really shows you that these liberties.
Joseph, I would like you
are
to
not here.
speak into the olive branch that National Unity Platform is handing out to its rebel MPs. Is it one that's going to work leading to reconciliation for them?
No, I think it's a commonsensical responsibility of any political leader to be open, open-minded, but also guided by the rules and regulations of political parties in question and organization. In any case, it's absolutely in the interest of NUP to be as sensible and as reasonable as possible, and particularly if you see the struggles they've had with Mpuga and some others. Anything but to do that, I think, is possible, in my opinion, a fair stroke. I don't have the details, a fair stroke from Chagulanyi's perspective. And number two, if that is the case, then perception is always extremely important thing in politics. So if for the first time they want to show that they're modest and decent, because I'm saying first time because as part of the headlines, NUP is more likely to get the headlines that they're radical, they're brutal, they're intolerant. So if that is part of it, then I think it plays well for them. Okay. And if you consider recent developments in parts of Uganda where they've been defections from DP, basically breaking DP and adding them much more into NUP, it gives them the grounds and foundations to be able to do more beyond the traditional base, which is in Uganda, and to do so and to do better across the country. Maybe that's a lesson for all other political parties and organizations. But from my perspective, whatever it is, as a political party leader, you mainstream people on the basis of what they carry and what they hold, rather than playing political opportunism. For the moment, I think for them it's much more about numbers and the focus on State House, whatever it is.
Dr. Robert, in that regard, the state of political parties as we journey towards 2026, you do have the National Unity Platform, the FDC, and its breakaway, to which the Electoral Commission is still delaying their approval, the PFF, among other political parties. It begs the question, what is the readiness of the opposition towards the general elections that we are heading into for 2026, and what is their fighting chance?
Yeah, you see, you judge their readiness looking at the infrastructure in which they operate. I've always given this example. In Uganda, we are going for a swimming competition. But there is one swimmer who is always in a swimming costume all through. The opponents are putting on an apron, overall, and gumboots, plus a helmet. And when the guys dive, mere dive into water, they sink. Then they say, you see these ones? These ones, how can they swim with me? And the other guy swims through. That should not make you sympathize with the political parties. But looking at all of them right now, NRM, there is a thin line between NRM and the state. NRM operates as a state. Yeah. I've always asked Chief Awich here whether their RA vehicles are government vehicles or they are vehicles for the party. And I have never heard about their budget and how they buy those cars and use them. If a man of NRM sits in a UG, how is it accounted for? Now, the other ones are supposed to operate on their own account. They are not allowed to collect money. They can only get money through contributions from their MPs and members. But the other money, you hear the president complaining about them. They don't collect taxes. They don't have any formal way of getting money. How do you compare them with the party in power? Of course, they used to get the other money, which they get that money which is divided according to the percentage of seats that you have in parliament. But is that enough? Is that enough to run an organization to compete? So when you look at, for example, a party like JEMA, which has two MPs, I think one MP, how can that compete with NRM, which has 350? So that is terrible in itself. Then when you look at what Sarah was talking about, that curtailment, they can be there by name, but operating not allowed. But themselves also have issues. There is a small problem of power struggle, which has killed the parties like FDC. FDC struggled amongst itself and it disintegrated. I guess FDC to make 20 MPs in parliament is going to be a very big problem. Then the division of the country. I've also given this example. I don't know whether viewers know that Western Uganda, that is from Kabale to Fort Portal, from the mainstream Western Uganda, from Kabale to Fort Portal, Sembabule to Lyantonde, going down there, has 272 constituencies. 272 constituencies. So mainstream Western Uganda is bigger than Buganda, Eastern Uganda, West Nile, and Northern Uganda combined. Now, that place is predominantly NRM. It's predominantly NRM. The opposition there is like 1%. Just a few skirmishes place. So NRM posts in every election, they are sure of over 270 MPs from only that place. Remember, Parliament is the decision-making body. It's the decision-making body in our country, which makes most of the decisions. So the chairpersons and what have you, the committees and so on and so on. So at the end of the day, you get these Senyonyi who have concentrated themselves in Uganda here and a few parts of Soga. There are about 70 of them or 105 of them. Yes, they can struggle. So they will be forced to be on the protest side than to the pushing things side, because they cannot make numbers. So every time they're just protesting, writing minority reports. Minority report can never be a law. It can be said for other people to just hear, but it will not. So it retards their growth.
Okay.
Then the last issue that has retarded the growth of multi-parties in Uganda is the people. The people don't understand a multi-party. They don't have a dispensation. There is this propaganda by government that compares themselves to the political parties. They say, for us, we build roads. What about these NUP? Well, how many roads have they built? They ask the things in public and people clap for them. They say, for example, we have put parish development model. What have they put? But the other one is financed by a budget, which Sarah talked about. The other one, they take all the taxpayers, they start implementing it and using it to undermine the other one. And you find an educated person, a person who is educated with a PhD, is asking, what is NUP doing in as far as development is concerned? How many roads have they constructed? So people are not teaching the right thing.
Okay.
There is no way NUP can construct roads. There is no way NUP can support health. They can only bring policy alternatives. They don't have the funds. So in my view, I think the opposition parties in Uganda are like plants in a desert. They are surviving under very difficult circumstances.
Which brings us to a final band, Honourable Odongo, in the question of the elections 2026, the country's readiness, especially stakeholders, but stakeholders in particular focusing on the citizens. As he has already alluded, the civic education is still largely lacking in the masses and the people who the power belongs to. How do we change that so that there's better elections for 2026, better leaders are put into positions of power and be able to then move this country into better development?
Civic education is an essential element of any democracy, in this case, of any election, because citizens must make informed decisions and they have to be aware of the conduct of an election. So I think that going forward, there is need for us to rethink the way these elections are conducted. Elections are not an end in themselves. we seem to be thinking that elections start from the date when we pick nominations. Elections is a full stretch. You build up to an election. You prepare the country for an election with the regulations, with the political organizations getting organized. Like I said initially, that the element of power to the people should be qualified. It's not just a statement in the laws, it has got to be in practice, and that power has got to be exercised diligently. And for you to empower that population, they need to be well informed so that they can make informed decisions. Now, Pirelli says that when they're advertising their tires, they say, power is nothing without control. That you can have power, but if you don't control it, then you could cause an accident. The element of control of power comes from the people, and those people must be very well informed so that they can exercise. So one, the law has got to be very, very clear on when do we start civic education. Two, we must be able to come to vet the organizations collectively that conduct civic education, so that you don't have skewed civic education. Three, that we must invest as a country. We must invest heavily in civic education. The Electoral Commission is having a deficit in their budget. Every year, the Electoral Commission comes up with budgets. Even political parties are not putting sufficient amount of monies from the monies that they are receiving on civic education, because it's not sufficient. The money is not there. So, we need to put money where it makes a lot of sense.
All right.
So for me, in terms of budget appropriation, Parliament needs to really put in, especially in an election year, they need to focus more on how do we finance our election process so that the outcome of that election reflects,
All right.
reflects the interest of our citizens. That's really, really very critical.
As we offer our closing remarks, I'll start with you, Major Awich. Readiness of the country for the stakeholders that have been mentioned, especially on the side of government, that should help aid and support the electoral processes to be free and fair, that will lead to the democracy we have been speaking about here for 2 hours. What is the readiness and what are the opportunities?
The readiness is there, and the burden to ensure that readiness is enhanced and exercised lies with the government. From whatever angle it chooses to exploit it from. I can list the sources, but I like to reply to Doctor in that. You see,
for the interest of time, we'll reply to Doctor off air.
Okay, fine. But the readiness is, for example, we have logistic readiness. He has already mentioned the Electoral Commission. So logistically, government should be ready, including funding Electoral Commission. And this logistics also goes far outside the Electoral Commission. For example, the other stakeholders like the police and the military to ensure there's peace. We would also be readiness in terms of legislations. I believe now the time that we have, considering the legislative cycle, including cabinet and what we can't do any now. So we presume that the laws in place are enough. The government has to guarantee peace, that nobody will be fighting or somebody, ballot boxes will be ambushed on the road. Also, part of the readiness is for us to be transparent. Transparency, are we ready and capable of calling the world to say, hey, come and see how we do it? And I think that readiness is there.
All right.
So there is a long list of readiness, and I think right now, Uganda is pretty ready to go for election.
All right.
Free and a fair one.
Joseph, not all hope is lost, is it?
Yeah.
No, it's terrible. Under NRA, I don't think we shall ever get ready and have a free and fair elections, the nearest of which was in 1980. I really hope that, as Comrade Awich says, the burden of responsibility lies with government. All they need to do is just create an enabling environment in which political parties and political actors can freely express themselves and actively compete and engage with the citizens of the country. That's really all which is paramountly needed. Rule of law and everything that we quite clearly said here. Unfortunately, this is a regime which is military and which is really not necessarily interested in democracy. As far as political parties are concerned, I think George referred, the burden of responsibility lies with the leaders, predominantly men actually, all of them are really men actually, men whom is very much about me, myself and I, power in political parties. And in many cases we throw jibes at NRA, but in many cases some of them are basically internal, personal and personality interests, so that we need to be able to make sure that internally the democratic processes within political parties and that the internal processes within political parties are worked upon. But quickly, on the question of funding of political parties, actually I hold very strong views as a conclusive remark, that any political party worthy of a name should have the responsibility to mobilize and organize themselves, including resources. Okay. I strongly believe that actually I don't think it's the responsibility of government to fund political parties. I think these monies are going to a privileged few individuals at the expense of the vast majority of our people for whom they cannot afford basic health and health services in the country.
Dr. Robert, what do you give as recommendations for government to allow people the freedom of speech and expression throughout this electoral process? Because people are entitled and do have a right to freedom of expression, however that expression is, even if it's against the government that is in power right now, but they shouldn't be in fear or curtailed. And because we've seen a change or trajectory where people are turning their freedoms of speech to social media. However, even then, now there's Computer Misuse Act and many other elements that are being used to curtail the people's expression of their freedoms and their desires for a democratic future.
I think the government, just like they encourage the people to go and register for those who are at the age of election, should encourage people to go and vote and choose a leader of their choice, irrespective of whether that leader is going to be NRM or DP or NOP. And that can only be possible if the government, the sitting government of Yoweri Museveni, can remove the military from election. Let the military only do their work of securing the country, keeping law and order, and not interfere with the elections. If they can do that for Ugandans and make sure that let people choose a leader of their choice without being threatened by some kangaroo, some facey, covered people who look like thugs, whom they even deny, they should just do that. If they could remove the military from election, we shall be good.
Okay. All right. Finally, Dr. Sarah, in regards to observing elections, I know that you observed elections in Uganda and beyond. What are some of those opportunities? What are some of those elements that we could adopt to have a more participatory, more engaging, and more fair election come 2026?
The one critical aspect of elections is the people. And the people need to be enabled to make informed choices. So this goes to the heart of civic and vote education and the required awareness. Each of the elections we've had increasing apathy and low voter turnout, but also with the numbers of spoiled votes that you wouldn't expect in a country where the literacy levels are 75% and above. So we need to do massive vote education. Unfortunately for elections, the vote education is done to complement the work of the Electoral Commission because it's their mandate under Article 61, Clause 5 to design and implement vote education programs. This time round, a few months to elections, we see nothing going on, and we don't know whether there will be effective vote education, and that's very important. The second issue that is important is for the Electoral Commission to exercise their power. Article 61 requires, and in mandatory terms, for the Electoral Commission to ensure regular, free and fair elections are held. The same article further emphasizes that Electoral Commission must supervise elections and all the actors that come into the sphere of elections. In my view, the current Electoral Commission is showing higher signs of weakness in taking charge of elections, and instead they've surrendered to the army, and going by the recent by-election in Kawempe, where the army deployed more than 30 members and even out of excessive impunity, drove a member with over 100 guns through a polling station. So I don't know what kind of elections to expect. So we need to see an authoritative electoral commission that can take charge of elections in this country, and then finally kick the army out of politics. The job of the army is to guard our borders and territorial integrity of Uganda. They should get out of citizens policing, and matters of law and order should be left to police.
All right, thank you so much. Major Awich, thank you so much for your submissions. Joseph Ochieno, thank you so much for your submissions. Honourable Odongo, we do appreciate your submissions. Sarah Bireete, thank you so much. And of course, Dr. Robert Ojambo, thank you so much. I am Priscilla, Regina, Nalwoga, and that has been the Citizens Chat on the subject matter of Uganda's democracy and the question of is it declining or moving forward. Now, of course, all that lies in your hands as the power belongs to the people, which is a resonating voice amongst all my panelists this afternoon. So as a country, as we are approaching the 2026 general election, the critical question remains, can Uganda reclaim the democratic spirit of the 1995 constitution? And will it continue down the path of authoritarianism as we're seeing it today, or can it redeem itself? And that redemption only lies in the democratic process that is ahead of you and me, exercising that power. And so call to action from all of us is that the power belongs to you. Go and cast your vote as and when it is called upon you as a citizen of this country, so that we can see a better country, a better Uganda for the future of our country. For God and our people, adios.